Great. Yeah, we can both take it together. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session. The title is Why Can't Employers Really Find the Talent They Need? What can we do about that? My name is Lois Shelley, and I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. Before I do that, I want to encourage everyone to add this session to your agenda through the app. That way, we will love for you to be able to leave a review of this session. I am going to introduce to you all Caroline Tate. I had to practice on that name. Caroline Tate is the president and founder of Kirtland Consulting. With over 20 years of experience as a strategist, executive, and business builder, Caroline is highly regarded in the consulting world for her expertise in strategic planning and revenue development. Her influence extends across multiple sectors, from her work with the Greater Cleveland Partnership to her role with the Ohio Semiconductor Collaborative Network. Caroline's impressive career includes 12 years with McKinsey & Company, a degree from Wharton, and an MBA from Case Western. Please join me in welcoming Caroline Tate.
Hi, thank you very much for the very kind introduction. Right, so I'm Caroline. Lovely to meet all of you, and I think I'd rather get down on the floor, so I'm going to come on down and see how this works. So the U.S. Chamber of Commerce put out a really awesome report recently that said that we have a workforce shortage. In fact, we're missing 1.7 million Americans from the workforce as compared to February 2020. So we're here today to talk about, well, where are the workers? Why are we in a worker shortage? And what can we do about it? I wonder if any of you have felt this workforce shortage. I imagine since you're here, you might have. Here's a couple of examples of how it's shown up in my work. The Workforce Development Board that I get to work with in Cuyahoga County is doing some new and creative ways to find potential workers in from non-traditional sources. That's one example. Another example is the sector partnership. One of the sector partnerships that we created in Cuyahoga County is using artificial intelligence to try to help both employers and job seekers have a better fit and increase their rates of retention. Another example is in Indiana. I was just speaking today with a gentleman from Indiana. We know that they're doing some really creative ways, policy changes to change the system for helping youth get exposed to apprenticeships during their K-12 years. And another example is the Ohio Semiconductor Collaborative Network has put together a whole network to identify ways to build the pool of engineering technicians. So these are just a few of the things that I see in my world that tell me that we have a worker shortage and folks are trying to rally around new and interesting strategies to try to address it. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more today. We're going to do that in 3 parts. One is I wanted to share some data with you to help you understand a little bit more about why we have a shortage and share a framework with you around how to think about it. The second is I hope to have a little bit of small group discussion so you all can learn from one another around strategies that you see having potential in your communities. And then the third is I wanted to talk through a case study. On some of the tables, there's a page to give some detail around the Ohio Semiconductor Collaborative Network. We're going to use the third part of our time together to share a little bit about the work underway in Ohio. And you had that very kind introduction. So I'm bringing with me a business background and employer background that I forged largely through my work at McKinsey and Company, but I also and I also get to work with change leaders who are trying to change their workforce and development systems. So those kinds of organizations that I mentioned, the Workforce Board, the Chamber of Commerce, the community college system in Ohio, and bringing the experience that we have working with those folks who are trying to change their systems in order to address the workforce shortage and help drive economic mobility for the residents in their communities, inclusive economic mobility. So I mentioned that the Chamber of Commerce had that really great report, which I highly recommend, that points out that we have, we're missing 1.7 million Americans since before the pandemic. And you can see the pretty precipitous decline from our peak back in the early aughts. And so the Chamber has done some really great work to explain why the labor force participation has been in decline. This is a huge, one of the biggest challenges actually that I see across my projects. Why is the decline happening? Well, there's a few reasons. Some of them are structural, right? So there's early retirements happening, and then we also have an aging workforce. And the report says that for individuals who are over 55 years of age, more of them are choosing to opt out. The rate of them choosing to opt out of the workforce actually expanded from 48% to over 50% over the between 2019 and 2021. So some of it's structural, and some of it is we're not doing so well at inorganic growth. We're bringing in folks from outside the country into the United States at the rates we have in the past. I was just astonished to learn that in the last decade, the peak was over 1 million new folks, net migration into this country. And it's now down, we're now down 75% of what that was. We're now just hovering around 250,000 individuals. That has traditionally been a great source of strength for our country, and we're falling behind on it. This next reason I actually think isn't so bad. It's about new business starts. More folks are choosing to start their own businesses. And certainly in Ohio, we talk a lot about the gig economy in particular. So there's people starting, kind of their independent work, and there's also folks starting their own businesses. So I think there's a lot of good that comes in it, but nonetheless, it explains, it's another reason why we have this severe worker shortage. Kind of along with that is an increase in savings rates. This was promoted somewhat during the pandemic when we had additional funding coming from the federal government. But overall, some people say, you know what, I've been able to save enough, and it gives me the freedom to choose to not participate. So that's happening as well. And another one that's commented on in the report is around the barriers to work, right? There are significant barriers that make it difficult for workers to get into the system. The report talks about access to childcare and also elder care, the lack of affordable access to those services, which are so badly needed for workers to be able to make the equation work and to be able to get into the workforce. I know in Ohio, some of the other key workforce barriers that we see are transportation is another one, housing is another one, literacy rates are another one, actually. So I think this explains a good chunk of why we have a workforce shortage. Does anybody have any comments or reactions to this, or things that you think should be on the slide that aren't, that you see in your work? Yeah, that's right. It's not, this has been a decline over time, not solely caused, although exacerbated, I think, by the pandemic. Yes, ma'am. I'll let you speak so they can hear you online.
Okay. I see from high school and out of high school children, even going into their mid 20s and 30s, not leaving home and not having to have a job because they can stay with their parents or other elderly folks so they don't enter the workforce.
Interesting. I haven't heard as much about that one, but it jives with my reality and what I see around me for sure. Thank you. Sorry. Yes, Lois.
I was surprised to hear the number two, that the migration to the US is the lowest when it sounds like on the news it's been the highest.
Yeah, the rate of decline was really shocking to me, and yeah, there's a lot of stigma around it nowadays. Yes, did you have one other comment? Oh, okay. When it comes back to you, let me know. So, as we see, the labor force participation rate has been in decline, and that has caused a tightening of the labor market, and also a persistent rate of the number of unemployed workers. We haven't been able to match folks with jobs as well, right? So there's also not just a participation challenge that we have, but also a matching challenge, helping folks get access to the skills that they need for work and helping employers find the people with the skills that they need. Oh, yes, ma'am.
When you mentioned the unemployed and the skills, and I'm thinking with that national career certification, and they take that test, then maybe the employers can say, this is what I'm looking for, this is what I'm looking for. And you do the NCRC and we can see where you are so the employers know what skills you have when you come to them.
Thank you. Yes, I think transparency and being able to create greater access is absolutely part of the solution that we need to be solving for. So I wanted to have a conversation with you all about what do we do about this? How do we both drive growth, because we want more jobs, but also how do we grow participation? And ultimately, this becomes how do we change a system? So much of my work is involved in systems change. So I mentioned I have a business background. I went to business school. And I studied marketing and finance, and I bring a business brain to this problem. And I thought it would be fun to share one of the models that has influenced me a lot, and it helps me think about this, from Seth Godin. So Seth Godin is a marketing guru in the business world. He's written the textbook on how to do marketing. And he's just a really fun guy. And he also has an education background as well before he got into marketing. And Seth would say, if you want to change a system, you need two things. You need possibility and you need enrollment. So I'm going to talk through each of those two things and explain a little bit about what he means. And then ultimately we'll talk a little with each other about how we're seeing this in our communities and also in Ohio in the semiconductor. So possibility, what does he mean by that? Seth means that possibility is about openness and fairness. So if we want to change the system, one of the things we need is that the learners in the system, the people in the system, need to know that something's going to happen, come of it. And employers too, both the learner, the employer, and the educational system, and the educator. They need to understand that I know that if somebody puts forth the investment in building up the skills and finding that employer and having that employer hire that individual, that something's going to come of it. We're going to have a return on investment. I have to believe there's possibility. And Seth is a publisher as well. He wrote the textbook on marketing. And so he said, for example, as an analogy, back, when I was a kid, if you wanted to publish, you had to go through a publishing house. You don't have to do that anymore. Kindle and Spotify and all these platforms make it possible to self-publish if you want to. It has made it possible. So there's belief that if I adopt those platforms, that I know that I'll be able to self-publish, right? So there's belief. So possibility. We need possibility. So I wanted to illustrate what that means a little bit and start to tie this to the semiconductor a work that I do as well. So there's a fantastic podcast out there that I would highly recommend. It's called Talking Technicians. It's published by Mentech, which is the Micro Nanotechnology Education Center. And they go and they tell stories of individuals who have chosen to pursue a career in the technician space, in the semiconductor space. And so go listen to them. This is from one of the many stories with a gentleman named Ethan. And I was listening to the podcast, and Ethan is asked to talk about his experience. And what Ethan says is, well, I decided to become a high performance maintenance technician. So this job is the job that actually supports all of the technicians inside of a semiconductor fab lab. So he helps make sure that all the maintenance tools are up and running and are available to use. So he explains what the job is. He explains his shift work schedule on this podcast, and then he talks about what it feels like for him. And he explains that when he decided to go down this path, it brought him back to some of his childhood joy around making things and preparing things. He talked about how it was like learning a second language. And then he talked about the reality of what the job is. He talked about the compensation package. He said that when you start, you can earn $50,000 to $60,000 at the start. You can get benefits and you can earn while you're learning. So over the podcast, Ethan is telling the story of how someone has made an investment and it paid off. It paid off to be able to build the credentials to get this job. So he's demonstrating in the podcast the possibility that if one is to build the skills, they would be able to get a return on their investment with this career path. So that's what Seth means by possibility. We have to help people see the possibility and the work options that are available to them. So the second thing that we need, Seth says, is enrollment. And this might sound a little odd because it's not the classic educational term necessarily. What he means is buy-in and belief. What he means is learners need to be able to believe that people like me do work like this. They need to be able to see themselves in it. And what Seth would say is it's not just on the burden of the individual to be able to get to that place. We can't expect Ethan's peers necessarily to just be able to get there on their own. We need systems. We need support mechanisms to guide people like Ethan to get to that place and then to support them on their journey once they're there. We need enrollment. I love that. People like me do work like this. I think about that a lot in the work that I do with folks that are working on workforce challenges. And if you continue to listen to the podcast with Ethan, he shares some other examples of how he got to his position. He explains that he had been in the hospitality industry at a restaurant where he felt like it was a dead end role for him. He didn't see a future. And he was introduced into a system, in this case, it was his community college, that helped get him access to the credentials and the degree that he needed to pursue this career. And he found an earn and learn opportunity with Intel. So he was able to pursue both his learning and get that experiential learning alongside at the same time, making it possible. And so we learn a little bit more about how the system really created enrollment for Ethan in his story. This work is hard. And I feel like it's helpful to acknowledge that sometimes. And it requires not management, which gives you the ability to have like authority and hierarchy and tell people what to do. Nobody's going to go tell Ethan what to do. Nobody's going to tell, the employers in the system to hire Ethan necessarily. It requires leadership. And that is hard because making change when you don't know for sure what's going to happen is risky. And so our job as a community is to paint a picture of what possibility can look like, is to design systems that enroll both employers and learners and our educators, and to guide learners into work and to support them when they're there. And then one other framework that I hope helps bring this idea to light. I'm a consultant, so I have to have a 2x2. So here's my 2x2. Is you can think of about certain occupations that exist now in this framework of possibility and enrollment. So you can start out at the bottom lower left. So a position that would have low possibility and low enrollment is Seth calls lava surfers, right? So I doubt this is a job, but anyways, if it was a job, I wouldn't have a whole lot of belief that if I was going to invest in my skills that I'd get a big return on that investment, nor are there any systems in place to guide me to that. But what I really love is this example of the top left, right? Think about in the MBA. Think about kids that are thinking about, wanting to be like LeBron James when they grow up. Is there a lot of possibility? Is there a high likelihood that if I invest the time, I'm going to become LeBron James? No. Right? There's not a whole lot of possibility. But is there enrollment? Are there systems around us from when we're very young that are encouraging this as a career path? Do we have high school basketball coaches? Do we have Nike gym shoes? Right? Do we have, the NCAA? There's all these things, these systems that have put in place to help guide Ethan to think about the MBA as a potential. And so you have young people trying nonetheless, despite that, which I think is really interesting and inspiring. And in that case, you need it, right? Because the MBA needs to find the diamond in the rough. So I think there's a lot of learnings that we can take across occupations, across career fields, and learn from the MBA. The bottom right, example around high possibility. His example is a nurse. So a lot of people, I think, would say that they know that what happens if you invest in building the skills and credentials for becoming a nurse, that the ROI is clearer than most, but we have a worker shortage. We don't have enough nurses in this country. So why is that happening? And I think you'd argue because we don't have enough enrollment. We don't have enough systems in place, both guiding folks to that career and also supporting them once they get there. So the holy grail in this framework is the top right box, is the high enrollment and high possibility, right? And Seth's example was social media influencers. So I was astonished to find out that in 2020, over 2 million people in this country earned six-figure income or more being a social media influencer. But I'm sure it's only gone up, right? That career didn't exist when I was a kid. Why is that happening? Why is that possible? Because there's high possibility, because people know that it can pay off, and because there's high enrollment, because we see it all around us. So high possibility and high enrollment. I would like you to have a chance to discuss this for just a couple of minutes. I would love for you to talk at your tables around two questions. What would it take for you to grow more possibility in the careers or the jobs available in your ecosystem? How can we help individuals in your community be confident that they'll get an ROI, a return on investment, on some of the careers available? And then the second question, discuss that for a couple of minutes, and then I'll ask you the question about enrollment. And then what can we do to help create systems that will guide and support individuals in that journey? Does that request make sense? Okay, so chat with your partner at your table for a couple minutes, please, and then I'll ask you to share a couple of the answers that come out. Please do also discuss enrollment. So if you haven't already switched to the enrollment question, switch now. Thanks.
I think you're stuck in a hotel or in a hospital at night, like on the night shift or whatever it may be. Yeah. Right. You'd also. Like in states, we probably need to focus on like employment needs, like 10 years from now, things like that. Like in Arkansas, it's agriculture and transportation. So getting young kids understanding what agriculture jobs look like at like a really early age, I think is important, so that they see that we can do this. These are career pathways, not just like where I grow up, like, farmers, and they're all these old rich guys, and that's not necessarily what all farmers do. I've seen some of my students, I taught in high school for 8 years, 9 years. Some of our students are becoming like ag consultants and stuff like that. They're merging the business and agricultural aspect together. Um, and that just, that would have been a cool job for me because I grew up in the country, like to kind of go into that, but I never saw it. I never saw anything but a rich farmer. And I just thought that, where I'm from, you got to have the land,
What's the legacy here,
I'll give us 1 more minute. All right. I will bring your attention back to the front, but I love the sound of table conversations. It warms my heart. So I'm really eager to hear what you guys had to say. And I also want to, there's a lot of ideas that got spread in this room right now, and I'd love to capture some of them. So if you don't mind, I would really love it if you would take a shot of the QR code here to answer the question that you'll see in the survey. I'm going to ask you to say just one thing that came up in your tabletop conversation. What's one idea around increasing possibility? Are you able to see the survey on your phone? Yeah. So if you could just type in, one comment on possibility, and then I think it should allow you to do the same on enrollment. If you could just share one idea on enrollment too, that would be so helpful, because then we'll get a good log of some of the many ideas. So I'll give you a second to do that. Does anyone have an example from their table they'd like to share? So I see here, I wonder if I go back and come back, yeah, oh gosh, 20 answers. So we won't have the chance to read all of these, but we can share them out after the fact. I see one more on the right-hand side, more representation from careers where learners could see what the day-to-day of the job looks like and what kind of doors it could open for them. Yeah, it's so hard. Can you remember when you're young trying to understand what jobs are? Sorry, that was a bad question. But I'll speak for myself. If I try to remember what careers are and what they look like, it's hard when you're young and you don't know. It's hard when you're old if you're not familiar with it. Lowering admission standards, but that comes with problems, right? So maybe there's policy plays to help make possibility clearer. And then on the enrollment side, let's see here. What are some of the examples? Career exposure, right? We're not there yet. Others that started at low wage jobs to become successful. So sharing more stories, I think, is what that is about. And providing incentives, explaining the benefits of pathways. So thank you for these examples. I look forward to reading through them, and I would encourage you to take this framework back to your colleagues in your work and think about how can we enhance both the possibility and the enrollment in our systems. So with our final time together, I wanted to share a little bit about the story of the Ohio Semiconductor Collaborative Network. There's an advanced manufacturing revolution going on in this country, and thank goodness for it. We're fighting against the jobs decline that's happened in many places, including the Rust Belt, where I'm from in Ohio. And we're making things here onshore again. And we're also contributing to national security issues, which I think is really cool. And so that's happening across advanced manufacturing. Semiconductors is one of the examples where that's happening. And if you're not familiar with it, you probably are, but in case you're not, semiconductors power our lives, right? These are the chips that are in our phones and our refrigerators and our cars. There's been a resurgence in semiconductor manufacturing, in part because of the CHIPS Act and the investment that the federal government has made to make it possible for semiconductors to be manufactured onshore. So CHIPS Act funding is encouraging sector growth. And in Ohio, we are lucky to be the beneficiaries of that work and that investment in many ways, in part because Ohio is one of a handful of states that Intel has chosen to build its fab labs to do the production of the chips onshore. This is awesome. This is exciting. And this is daunting and it's scary. Because of the workforce challenge that comes along with it, among, I think, other reasons too, but that one in particular. So one of the really critical roles in the work is the role of the engineering technician, who is the person who gets into a bunny suit and goes into the fab lab and helps and maintains the robots and the machinery that's there to make the chips. And in Ohio, we just don't produce enough engineering technicians. In fact, we looked at it. We think we need at least 12,000 of these guys a year and gals a year, and we're only completing around 3,000 of them. So there's a very significant growth curve that we need to be able to have in our work. And so the Ohio Semiconductor Collaborative Network was put together, funded by Intel, to try to address this very significant workforce challenge. The network includes a group of folks that meet several times a year together to talk about the challenge and to collaborate on our progress. So that includes Jobs Ohio, which is our economic development statewide organization. It includes the Ohio Manufacturing Association, the Ohio Association of Community Colleges, and some of the colleges within, there's 23 public colleges in Ohio, and some of the colleges are especially involved, like the Columbus State Community College, which is in that bullseye part of Ohio where the production of the Fab Labs are actually taking place. And so the work is hard for many reasons. I would say on the enrollment side, so getting these systems together to both guide people into these careers and support them when they're there. One of the challenging things is we have so many disparate, diverse, different organizations, and they all have, it's like the network of networks. They're all part of their own, networks, represent different networks. So aligning those folks under a North Star around what's important, what are our goals, has become important. And on the possibility side, I think there's just not as much visibility about the engineering technician position as there could be. And there's also the very real fact that you all know very well, especially for adult learners, that there's demographic and challenges that make it hard to jump into this career, right? Adult learners are living full lives. They often have kids. There's lots of single parents. And we know the community college completion rate is not great. Nationally, it's at 43%. And so that's a little bit about what's made it hard. So on to the good and how we're working on this challenge together. So, the vision is to be bridging industry needs with educational offerings through strategic partnerships and innovation. And we have begun that journey and have made some really good progress, I'd say. And we've created a strategy that has 4 pillars to it that I think are both addressing enrollment and possibility. So the 4 pillars are around leveraging those networks, recruiting employers and industry sector partnerships, investing in communication awareness and marketing, and building a hub and leveraging a spoke, which is kind of a fancy way for offering technical assistance. So I was going to give a couple of examples within these. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. And did you get your picture? Should I go back? On the leveraging networks, a couple of examples, like on the possibility side, one of the really exciting things is one of the partners has created, the OMA has created in partnership with others, a core competency model to articulate the skills that's needed to be successful in an engineering technician role. I'll say, I don't remember if I put it somewhere else too, but I'll just say one of the special things about this role is it's not only relevant for semiconductor, it's relevant for electric vehicles. It's relevant in many areas across the advanced manufacturing spectrum. And so having clarity around the skills needed is a super valuable resource to be able to align our educators and our employers around what skills we're investing in. And on the enrollment side, I would say that this network of networks has succeeded in attracting even additional funding. So that's another one of the big benefits. It's bringing funding into the system, which allows a lot of the other pieces of the strategies to unfold. Recruiting and retaining employers and industry sector partnerships is our second pillar. So as an employer first kind of person, I'm a big fan of this. I think we need our employers side by side with our educators in order to be able to fulfill the vision of possibility and enrollment. And we're doing that here through experiential learning. I think lab experiences are actually one of the most common experiential learning examples, but there's 8 different permutations on work-based learning, internships, paid and unpaid, et cetera, that are taking place. And we're doing it not just with Intel, but with other employers around. Because another beautiful thing about this work is that there's a whole supply base that serves the manufacturing in Ohio that is also going to benefit from this work, as well as some of those adjacent sectors that I mentioned. And then the third, communication, awareness, and marketing. So one of the things that has gotten spawned as a result of this collaborative network is additional research into the individual motivation. What motivates someone like Ethan to raise his hand and say, yes, I want to pursue a career as a technician? So because of this network, Jobs Ohio is actually taking a lead on researching that question. So I think that helps bring in some of the possibility. And on the enrollment side, one of the big benefits, I think, has been around communication and consistency in language across the 23 community colleges and others in the ecosystem, having a clear way to describe what an engineering technician is, to help folks get interested and excited about it. And then last but not least, building a hub and leveraging a spoke model. So this is about building content that's going to be useful to the members of across the state, and then supporting them in the adoption of it. And one of the biggest, I think, examples has been on curriculum. In a really fast period of time, in like less than a year, the members of the network have developed new curriculum. The big ones are in manufacturing, intro to manufacturing, intro to semiconductor, and vacuum systems. And those new courses have are underway of being adopted and implemented at the schools. And the OSCN is there to support them. The community of practice that has been established around this is one of the best ways that they have been able to do that. And so, in summary, I'm really excited about the work that has been made possible through the OSCN. I'd love to see more collaborations like this. I really do believe that it takes a village to raise both the possibility and enrollment for our workforce of tomorrow. And so I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Let's give Ms. Tacha one of a hand. You've done a great job. And to the rest of you, I just want to remind you to put this in your agenda so that you can do your evaluations within the app. This concludes the rest of our, unless you have any questions for her, we thank you all for coming.